First up is Alien Romulus, which is a new film in the Alien franchise. And I fully acknowledge and admit I don't really like horror movies and scary movies, but I do love the Alien films. I think part of it is just, in terms of sci-fi, they are some of the best of all time. Alien and Aliens, of course, are the standouts. I will acknowledge don't know the last time and or if I've seen the entirety of things like Resurrection and 3. And, there's a lot of middle ones that I'm like, oh, yeah, those. I definitely have seen Prometheus. I definitely have seen Covenant. So the good thing about Alien Romulus, and also maybe a ding against it, is it definitely borrows heavily from the first Alien film. So if you were to enter this franchise anew with Alien Romulus, you'd probably be okay. There are a lot of things if you are invested in the franchise that you'd be like, I see what you're doing there, or I see where you took that from, or oh, I see you're trying to connect these dots. Good luck. But if you're a newcomer, please watch Alien first. Like, please just do me that favor. If you haven't seen anything else in the franchise in a while, you'll be fine going into this. I'm constantly struggling with, can we just please have new ideas? Like, I know that this franchise is beloved and the originals are some of the best of all time, so I get why they keep going back to the well, but would I like to see an original sci-fi, even a sci-fi horror film? Yes, absolutely. But does this muck up recycling the original one? No, it does a pretty decent job. I don't think you'll be disappointed. I don't know if this is bringing anything new or really elevating it. I think it is just kind of keeping it alive and not sullying the name, which feels kind of sad if that's the bar. But since the bar is set high because of the original film, I'm like, okay. Anyway, clearly I am slightly torn about how I feel about regurgitating films, but clearly I'm slightly torn about how I feel about, dragging a franchise out like this. But I did enjoy the film, even though it is a scary horror movie. I will say I did not find myself as scared as I thought I was going to be. I think this is one of those ones where the trailer is almost a little bit scarier than the film itself. There are also things in this that are absurd, and I don't think they're intentionally absurd. There are some visuals that I'm like, these were choices, and I don't know if you were light on budget, or this was the intended design, or this is how we're trying to do this, but there are some things that I'm not going to spoil what they are. It's just like, oh, okay, that is what you have chosen to put on the screen. All right. I giggled to myself quite a few times because of that. I don't think the whole audience was, but, VFX background, etc. Also just fan of the sci-fi genre. There's some absurdities in there. There is also, of course, classic xenomorph suspense. This one takes place after the events of Aliens, so the first film, before the events of Aliens, the sequel, and it follows a crew of new folks who are stuck on this mining planet and want to get out. It stars Kaylee Spaney, David Johnson, Archie Renault, Isabella Merced, Spike Fern, and Eileen Wu. And standout for me here, I know Kaylee Spaney is probably the name most folks know out of this crew, but David Johnson does such a good job. Kaylee Spaney is our kind of Sigourney Weaver, Ripley character, or not, nobody can fill those shoes. I'm just gonna be honest. What huge mech shoes to fill. Kaylee Spaney does a good job, but David Johnson's performance in this, I was just blown away by. He elevates this film in a way that I was like, oh, okay. Yes, I realize that this is, like I said, recycled and not necessarily bringing the most new stuff. And David is probably pulling more from a Prometheus than he is from, say, an original Alien. But I actually really liked the balance of the two between that. So for him alone, I would see this film, alien horror movie. It's scary in that senses, but not too scary. So if you're worried about that, don't bring your little kids. It's probably going to be nightmare inducing for them. But aside from that, if you are generally somebody averse to pop out horror frights, I think you'll be able to navigate this. I don't know if folks were wanting or expecting to be more terrorized by it, but I was able to sleep at night, which is always a good thing for me. The action is fine. I think, like I said, the standout performance for me, David Johnson. Kaylee does a great job. The actors do a fine job, and I was actually surprised because, with no disrespect to any of them, there's not necessarily a huge name attached to this. None of them yet are necessarily at the huge name standout level where, for something like Prometheus, when they're like, oh, Michael Fassbender's joining, you're like, oh, okay, we're really investing in this. So I was a little concerned that they were maybe going to write this off as a low budget, whatever, but they invested, although I wish they invested more into some of the VFX in certain parts. Fede Alvarez directed. I have not seen his other work because He mostly does horror, and that's not my genre, but I found it pretty on par with the vibes of Alien, Aliens. It's not there, but it still scratches the itch of them. I personally, and I might be in a minority here, I am a fan of something like Prometheus, which I liked where it was going. I don't think it closed the loop there, and I'm really sad that we didn't really continue down that path, but I understand why. So if you want just something in the vein of original Alien that's not quite there, but it's close enough, I don't think this is going to disappoint you. I'm going to give it a 3.9 out of 5. The next film I have is an original film. It's called Jackpot, and it is out on Prime Video. And I'm going to say the following, and I mean this legitimately as a compliment. This film is so stupid, but in the best way possible. I laughed so hard. There were times where I just couldn't help it, and I was shaking my head to myself. I'm like, this is stupid, but I loved it. It is very much, weirdly, my sense of humor. So it takes place in California in the near future. I want to say it's 2030 or about, and they have instituted a new thing called the Grand Lottery, and it's kind of Battle Royale-ish meets Hunger Games, but you basically opt into it, and if you are selected, it is legal for other people who are participating to kill you, and if they kill you before sundown, there's a time limit, if they kill you, they claim the $1 billion jackpot. If you survive, you keep it. And I do like it makes me feel better being okay, it's an opt-in scenario. It's not this is a way to cull society. This is a way to cull the risk takers or give an opportunity to them. It stars John Cena, Awkwafina, Simu Liu, Aidan Mayeri, Donald Elise Watkins, Sam Ashgari, Murray Hill, and then there are some cameos that I am not going to spoil because they were such a delight. I am such a fan of John Cena as a comedian. I love him so much. I love him in Peacemaker. I love him in this. He is such a beautiful blend of hulking himbo meets really earnest guy, and I think he gets to play it really well in this film. I should also note, like I said, some of the humor is just ridiculous and silly and just tickles my funny bone in a very specific way that's nerdy and all that stuff. I understand this film might not be for everyone, but I was watching it, I was like, my dad's gonna love this because the one who introduced me to Monty Python. It's descendant from that type of thing. There's also a lot of quick biting humor in it. There's some very specific LA jokes that I really enjoyed, having spent more time here now. So again, I acknowledge some of these jokes are not going to be for everyone, but I do think if you are a fan of John Cena's humor, if you are a fan of Awkwafina as an actress, this could be really fun for you. Again, this is not meant to be a hard commentary on the dystopian future we may or may not be headed towards. Hopefully less so now than we were maybe when this was written, but it has notes of that. But this is really meant to be, I've heard them talk about it, it's like Jackie Chan comedy, martial arts inspired. And I think it accomplishes that really well. The physical humor is great. The pop culture humor is definitely there. You have to be aware of some of the references, obviously, and I can see that being part of the prohibitive part, but it's not so insular that it's going to be unless you're chronically online, you're not going to understand this. I laughed very hard at several points during the film. Is it high art? Not necessarily. Is it art for people who are high? Maybe a little bit more so. It's also, I should note, directed by Paul Feig, written by Rob Yescombe. I had a good time watching this film. I can tell it's not everyone's cup of tea, but for me, I thoroughly enjoyed it unabashedly, and it's streaming from the comfort of your home. I'm going to give it a 3.8 out of 5. The last film I have this week is called Skincare, and this is actually apparently inspired by a true story, which I'm not familiar with what it is based on, but Elizabeth Banks plays an esthetician called Hope Goldman in this, and she is, she is famous. She has a lot of famous clients. She has a skincare line she's about to launch. And then a competing esthetician moves in across the way in the little shopping complex. Around the same time, somebody starts to terrorize her and do all these horrible things, kind of dox her, put her in real danger in many scenarios. And, things start to escalate, and it's how that web gets woven and unraveled and just how everything goes from there. It also stars Nathan Fillion, Louis Pullman, MJ Rodriguez, and Luis Gerardo Mendez, and I really wanted to like this film. This is the type of mystery thriller film that I guess enjoy more, mostly because it's less pop-out scary horror. I think Elizabeth Banks does a good job of capturing the kind of desperation of somebody wanting to push themselves to the next level and being on the brink of it, and things just going awry. And so instead of looking at what the actual issue is, just starting to blame everything around them, but meanwhile horrible things are actually happening to her. It's just so the spiral is hard to watch, but it's also not necessarily satisfying in the story itself is satisfying way. The people in this film generally hard to root for, and I'm totally fine with a film which I don't think a film has to have a clean, squeaky protagonist. I think you can have people who are in moral shades of gray be your story protagonist, but It's also hard when they're not like going on journeys and not the most compelling. And the mystery part of this didn't end up being as interesting or portrayed in as interesting a way as I would have wanted. And it's also only an hour and a half film, but it felt longer, and it felt like it spent too much time on certain aspects of it and of her spiral that, you know, and I wanted to know more about some of the other elements at play. So would I recommend you run out to a theater to see this? Unfortunately, not. And I wanted to, you know, I wanted to be like, hey, I've got this great indie film for you to see this week. If and when it ends up on streaming or digital, etc., I don't think it's, you know, going to be a terrible film to put on, but I really had high hopes for it because, you know, story, concept-wise, it sounded really engaging, but I don't think they were able to translate it as well to this feature format as they could have. You know, I would actually be interested in, like, the docu-series on this versus a fictionalization of it. So I, unfortunately, am only going to give Skincare a 3.3 out of 5.